This is Lou Elizondo, and you are listening to That UFO Podcast.
Hi everyone, and welcome back to That UFO Podcast. It's been a while since I done a roundtable, and I thought no better way to kick off March than be lazy and invite some other people on to do the talking for me. So joining me to discuss a busy few months that have kicked off 2023, to give him a proper introduction, which is rare, the co-founder of UAP Media UK, the co-founder of 33 Ounce Media, 33... That's weird. I've never said it out loud before. 33 Ounce Media, and part of the Phenomenology team, soon to begin filming their second season out in Colombia. You will almost definitely know him from the breakdowns on this podcast, Daniel Zetterstrom, or Dan. Hi, Dan.
Because you said Daniel, I feel like I'm in trouble now.
Yeah, the weirdest part was saying 33 Ounce Media out loud. It doesn't sit right with me. I'm so used to reading it.
I think we tend to just say like 33 ounce, like we shorten it.
Yeah, 33. There you go.
There's a lot of implications that come with that, so you know.
Yeah, there is. We'll leave that one there. Also, we have the host and creator of the wonderful Somewhere in the Skies podcast. He asked me to say that. He is an author, researcher, presenter, and also part of the UAP Media UK team. Ryan Sprague. Ryan, welcome to the pod.
Thanks, man. I'm cleanly shaven, looking like a grown baby, and this is as casual as I get, so this is going to be fun, man. Just sitting back and letting you guys do all the work.
I never picked up you had shaved. I just thought you looked ill. So for those on YouTube that will be able to see Ryan, yeah, he's just shaved. And speaking of shaved, finally, one of the cabbies over at Calling All Beings and one half of the spectacular Luminal Phrames. He is... I know you affectionately as a waif soul because that was how I originally saw your content on Twitter, and it is Nathan. Nathan, welcome back.
Thank you, Andy. I'll always have affection for you as well. Good to be here.
Thanks. It's rare I get it in my life at this age. So thank you all for joining me. This particular show, Peek Behind the Actors curtain here, has changed a few times as I had a few different ideas what I wanted to talk about. But given the listener response on Patreon, Discord, YouTube and emails, I've decided just to kind of go a bit with the flow here and go with your talking points to put out to the guys and myself. So let's jump straight in. There's been a lot happening. It's been a busy 2023 so far. Layla on emails, very good song by Eric Clapton as well. Leslie Kean's series UFOs Investigating the Unknown was fantastic, she says. It was perfect for for new people to the subject and had enough in it to keep folks with a long-standing interest engrossed. What's next, though, in terms of a series that really pushes the envelope? As amazing as this series was, it seems like it's 5 episodes and done. Till the next one like this rolls along, I want to see more follow-up, things to be built on. Is that unfair? I'll come to you first, Dan. And I think what she's getting at, thank you for that, Layla, is, for example, Unidentified, a really good introduction to the UFO topic. It introduced you to people like Lou Elizondo, Sean Cahill, Ryan Graves, and others that are now big parts of it. But then a couple of years later, another documentary series drops, which is a fantastic introduction to the UFO topic. Doesn't get built on. Now we have Leslie Kean's series, fantastic introduction to the UFO topic. Is it going to get built on, or is this just another placeholder until the next one comes along?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Over the past few years, we seem to have gone from having these kind of low production quality documentaries to having these kind of 60 minutes-esque pieces of media that are really concise and just really, really well made. And in terms of them being built on, each one kind of brings something new. Like Leslie Kean's series has Helene Cooper, who we've never heard talk before, and a few other characters kind of who open up about certain things. So it's getting more in depth and establishing the players in the space and their credentials in a more in-depth, concise way as we go. The Leslie Kean thing is 5 episodes. Unidentified was 2 seasons. So, it's kind of shrinking down and kind of getting to the point a bit quicker for people. But just like the Phenomenon movie, it gets to a point where it has to kind of go to be continued. And that's not, we haven't got past that yet. And I think the reason is just because enough stuff hasn't happened. We're getting stuff happening almost every week now. And if they were to add an episode, maybe they could maybe like fill the last year. But again, you'd hit that to be continued kind of space. So I'm sure once we get hearings, once we kind of get, another year maybe down the road, we'll start seeing maybe a follow-up from James Fox there on the phenomenon, just kind of updating people on what's going on behind the scenes. And yeah, kind of scratching that to be continued itch, I would say.
Ryan, I'll come to you next on that same question, but also add, as someone who creates content themselves, right, in different ways, for TV, for podcasts, books, right, you've got it all covered, Dick. Do you think the mainstream audience is there for that continued series to be made? Like, there's that, like Dan says, it's these great series, well put together, introduces the topic to 2 million viewers, 3 million viewers. Is there enough there? Forgetting the UFO Twitter community, for example, which is, a few thousand, and the Reddit community, which is a few thousand. That's not enough to justify another full TV series, is it? Do you think there's enough folks out there to consume that type of media?
Yeah, good question. I mean, the normal, I don't want to say normal, but like the everyday person who doesn't look into this stuff like we all do, even now when they find out what I do in terms of producing UFO content or research and whatnot, uh, if I just say Tic Tac UFO, I'd say probably like 95% of them know what I'm talking about now. And that's people who've never looked into UFOs and stuff like that, and they'll just be like, "Oh yeah, what that was like on the east or on the West Coast, right?" So I think we are now at a point where most of the mainstream is aware of a lot of the buzzwords that kind of fly around mainstream media with a lot of this, but they don't know the nitty gritty. They don't know who Commander Fravor is. They don't know who Ryan Graves is or what Go Fast is. So I think, like Dan said, we're at that point now where all these kind of mainstream places are trying to catch up to people like Tom DeLonge and Unidentified, or even the stuff that James Fox did. That's why we're now seeing 60 Minutes and all these mainstream sort of outlets try to do their own version of the Cliff Notes version of a lot of this. So yeah, I think we are at a point where we can kind of move on. But again, that's coming from somebody who thinks, breathes, lives, and sleeps this stuff. So maybe every single one of these things has some sort of value, and I think they do. If one new person is now learning about everything that's been going on since 2017, that's awesome. And to kind of play off of what Dan said, I know for a fact that people like James Fox are trying to do that, trying to move this conversation forward instead of just looking at the Tic Tac again and this and that. I talked to James actually yesterday about this, and he's currently working on something that is kind of a follow up to everything that's been going on post 2017. Without giving specifics, I'm in no place to do that, but I do know that he's kind of at that point too as a filmmaker where he's like, okay, we get it. We know kind of the new ufology post 2017. Now what? Like, where is this all heading? So yeah, I'm excited to see what comes and kind of the ripple effect of all of this. Again, if one filmmaker saw that Leslie Kane series and is now inspired to continue looking into that, awesome. Same with like the work of Jeremy Corbell. If one person now learns about Bob Lazar or about the Mosul Orb, whatever
Yeah.
Corbell's bringing forward, that can have a ripple effect for more people to now come forward and continue that story in the way they see fit, I guess.
Yeah, and Nathan, just your thoughts on the same thing. Like Dan and I have spoken on the podcast before about if there's a piece of evidence, and I think sometimes this is the issue, people expect a new series to bring out a new video, the new Tic Tac, the new Go Fast, the new Gimbal. That's not going to happen in a documentary that takes a year to produce. There's not going to be that holding of a piece of footage that's that incredible, the black triangle photograph that's all kind of fabled and talked about. That's not going to appear in a documentary for the first time because that goes on the news. Dan, you and I have talked about that many times before. Like that comes out in a big way on socials. That's high noon material, for a Jeremy Corbell, as we would say. So are the expectations of some of these documentaries and what they can produce unrealistic?
It depends on the audience. So I think a lot of this is related to the platform. I think that most people are hungry for this topic. And I say that because you can look at the big articles we're all familiar with that have been published on the New York Times. So if you look at their viewer counts, the reading counts on those articles, they're astronomical. So the appetite, the interest is there. It's where is the message being given, and what platform is the message being given on? That's what is important, I think, in human society, because we're very we look to each other in the room for permission to be interested. And when it's on a certain platform, it then gives us permission to be outwardly interested in the topic. And so what we've seen over the last several years is a movement of this topic from fringe circles, inner circles, tiny circles, into outer circles of greater acceptability, bigger platforms, bigger productions. As Dan and Ryan pointed out, the quality of these productions have gotten better over time. So that is continuing to happen. As that happens, and at least I think an inflection point will occur where it's on the right platform in the right places for enough people to see it and say, oh, wait, you mean I can take this seriously now? I've always been interested, but you're telling me I can take it seriously, and therefore we all can take it seriously. That's what I think I'm looking for. And I feel like with Leslie's show, it is moving in that direction.
As someone who makes a podcast, I won't complain, because anything that comes out like this, you see a trickle down to listeners, viewers, opportunities for people, artists, and it means that our other podcasts pop up. Series like Dan Phenomenology become, viable, and they can be made, and people have an interest in it. And I don't see that as a bad thing. And maybe it's a little bit like expecting every Marvel movie to be an Avengers film, as opposed to getting the big Avengers movie and then 7 movies after that, which are smaller, but kind of tell the individual stories. But that's where a James Fox leaves and goes and does, a smaller Virginia piece, which has more of a niche audience. He goes on to Ryan's podcast. He writes a book that Dan commissions the cover of, and, different people get different aspects of that. And eventually it comes back to Phenomenology 2, where that big audience can jump on board again, and everyone else has benefited from those kind of smaller conversations roundabout. So I just don't know if we're going to see. I would like to see people like Leslie follow up with a bigger series again, but that's down to the networks to kind of pick up that kind of stuff and run with it. And timing can always be a big thing as well, can't it? Last year, was it CNN done the HBO Max, the J.J. Abrams series that ended up a little bit of a damp squib, I think was fair to say, because it started well and then went right off the cliff in terms of credibility, I think was the common consensus. So interested to kind of see where that goes. But yeah, it's one for the future, and we're going to see more documentaries. There's always going to be them, going back to, we've talked about the days of video stores having, the alien autopsy videos, or the same, Dan, when we talked about UFO sightings, you'd go in and see like the top 50 UFO sightings now caught on tape with never before seen footage, and all that stuff kind of happens just in a much, much nicer way now. So lots to come from that space still. But yeah, I agree, it was a good series. I've not seen the full thing yet, but what I have seen looks good. It's got the right players, the right tone. I just would love to see more, that kind of next step on there. Following on from that, something that's been kind of part of the news cycle recently, Tom, I don't think that Tom DeLonge could have been, but I don't think so. Are we really believing that those 3 objects that were shot down by the US jets were all balloons? Something about all of this just doesn't sit right. This has obviously been a big talking point for many, many weeks now. It got to the point where it looks like hobby balloons were being blamed or, cited as the reason for these things being shot down. I've had some listeners send me some pictures of various different arts and craft pieces that are being shown, and it does seem a little bit like we're going back to the original Roswell photos with the Jesse Marcel, with the wooden, the foil in the wood, going, look, this is what we found. Is it just we're conditioned to the conspiracy side of things with this topic? Or was it a case of, no, these were 3 balloons being shot down? Ryan, I'll come at you first on this one. What are your thoughts on how this story's kind of played out?
Yeah, I mean, I change my mind every day, and it's frustrating. I'm sick of it. If I hear the word balloon now, like, I immediately run away. It makes me feel nauseous. However, every conversation had on this, and every outlet that covers it, I learn a little bit more technically about like what these things could be, the aircraft in which tracked them, possibly captured photo or video, and eventually shot them down. Specifically with Tim McMillan at the debrief. I learned a lot from an article he released about this recently. And I'm kind of right now at a point where I don't think any of these were hobby balloons. I don't. That's not to say I think they're extraterrestrial craft either. I do believe that almost every single one of these things shot down were some sort of surveillance equipment. I mean, you don't just go identify a hobby balloon and shoot it down. It just doesn't seem. It just seems illogical to me at this point. And recently speaking with a fighter pilot on the show, they specifically said they know exactly what they are. They would not, and she said this having done things like this, shot things down. She said they would not shoot it down if they didn't have a positive identification of what it was. Just know that. So I don't think it's a matter of we're very unclear on what it was, but we shot it down, and now they're not going to recover the debris. Like, we all know this at this point. This story's ad nauseum. But I'm at the point right now where now I believe that it's all political. It's all geopolitical. It's all sort of surveillance uh, equipment of some kind, and that's where I land right now. Ask me tomorrow, I'm probably going to go back to it was a Boy Scout troop and it was a weather balloon. I don't know, dude. It's so dizzying, and I'm kind of over it. But at the same time, like, as UFO researchers, we have to continue to chase this story.
Yeah.
Because it does unwittingly involve us all in some way, shape, or form. Like, people come to us and want to know what's going on, and I wish we had answers for them, but we're not getting the transparency to give anyone answers. So, yeah, that's kind of where I'm at with all of this.
I'm with you on that. You can land on an opinion, and I've said enough times to Dan on this that I think, X is the reasonable outcome for this piece of footage or this video or this story. But if things come to light where that changes for good or for bad, then you have to roll with it, and you have to have that kind of fluid opinion in this topic. And I think that's where you get a lot of the arguments on social media, don't you, where people are so hard and fast on one thing that they don't allow the rest of the evidence, whether it means it debunks something for them or not, to kind of get in the way. Nathan, how have you kind of followed this story, and where are you kind of sitting with it?
I empathize a lot with what Ryan said in terms of the head spinning nature of the whole saga. It's exhausting to kind of think about the different angles of consideration here. I tend to look at this though from a big picture standpoint, and what this does to our collective sort of thinking, our consciousness related to what the U.S. can do or does do in its skies. The fact that it occurred so recently in proximity to that balloon incident, the large Chinese balloon, is perplexing. The fact that they haven't released any footage whatsoever of this is perplexing. The hobbyist balloon, example, to me doesn't really ring very true, because if it were like a scientific balloon or hobby balloon, wouldn't one of those groups already claim that it was theirs? Wouldn't one of those groups already come forward and say, yeah, that, we lost it. However, we had GPS on it. They all use GPS for those things, and it went, fell into the ocean or whatever this time of that. So we've heard none of that. We've not heard the government really point to that either. Oh, hey, we found it. It was in fact a hobby balloon, and here's the group that was using it. So yeah, so it's a little bit strange. You couple that with comments like from Marco Rubio, using the word advanced objects in a comment recently, which I think is pretty eyebrow raising. All that said, to me, there's a kind of acclimatization that is happening, in my opinion. I don't know how well it's orchestrated. I don't know how coordinated it is. It could be pretty loosely coordinated, or maybe not at all. But I think the overarching effect is getting people thinking about what is in the sky, what we do with objects in the sky. And that then lays the groundwork for a variety of things in the future that may take place. So you want the public to think that the U.S. government, has control over its airspace, right? So being able to identify these things and take them out of consideration as a threat to air safety is a great thing for the public to know. Oh, our government's got the skies under control. I can get on the plane and go visit my grandma. I'm not going to have to worry about something that we're going to run into. That's the kind of narrative that you want to see, but we don't have the complete story. So what I'm looking for now is what is the follow up to that? So I believe there are stories in the works, and the best stories take time. We all know this. It's not that you can just write an article in a day. That really digs into the deep aspects of what went on with these incursions and encounters. So there are stories in the works that are going to, in my opinion, reveal greater detail about what happened here, and those will be really interesting. I don't think necessarily that we're going to see like we shot down some sort of alien craft or whatnot, but I think it's a more complicated story than just additional balloons, hobbyist balloons, scientific private group balloons, that kind of thing. I think it's more complicated, and it relates to the overall unfolding, as what I kind of pointed to earlier, the unfolding of this topic more broadly in the public awareness.
Dan, I've seen both those arguments kind of online, or points that Nathan's made, that one, this is the US government trying to wrestle back control of the UFO narrative and put the toothpaste back in the tube by going, look, it's all balloons, it's all misidentifications, we're in charge of this and maybe things will go away. But also, I've seen many people say that this is just the beginning of, in a few months' time, does something else get picked up that they turn around and say, actually, this isn't like what we shot down before. We lost something. And then a few months after that, we've tracked something again, but something shot off into orbit and we've lost it. And is it a way of that potential soft disclosure happening, that they start to admit there's something else out there? Where are you sitting with all of that just now?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think the first thing to say is that the debris wasn't able to be recovered because we all know Lockheed got there first, right? They privately kind of scooped that up. I'm kidding. But yeah, we had a number of different objects there, supposedly found because NORAD opened up their filters, which just means they were looking at things outside of what they'd already identified the fingerprints of. And they found a whole bunch of other things up there. For me, there are kind of a few possibilities here. Either the US is being genuine and they, vaporized these objects and they were small and, the debris kind of flew into the wind and that's that. Or they recovered these objects, and whether it's anomalous or related to spy activities, there's some intelligence value there. So they don't want to kind of show their hand in the same way as they didn't show their hand in terms of saying, hey, these are the shapes of all the UAP in these range Fowler reports that we're getting. That was all classified. We know that. And there'll be a reason that was classified. It might be a case of not letting China know that we know that they know that we, those kind of, like you say, political games, right? Or the US shot down some object that belonged to the CIA or something like that, and they're just trying to cover up a whole bunch of humiliation and just being inept. It's always funny with these things because you have the two extremes, that either the government is playing 4D chess and is brilliant and covering everything up, or they're completely terrible at what they do and they're just humans behind the wheel and they're flawed. So both of those can't be true. It's probably somewhere in the middle as a lot of things. It's been really interesting seeing the kind of the myth build though, and people taking these different portions of the story and running with them. Probably very similar to what happened back during Roswell, where the lie supposedly travels around the world before the truth can get its pants on. That's the saying. So we're essentially seeing a modern day UFO myth being built, no matter which way we look at it. But the important thing is that these objects allow us to kind of clear up the data pile and to better define what it is that all of us here today are interested in. There's huge interest due to this being covered more, which just leads to more opportunities for series and films like we were just talking about, because people are going to be looking for this really concise, good information. The whole Pico balloon thing is really strange. The North Illinois Bottle Cap Balloon Brigade, which sounds like a fun club, that's a mouthful. NIB, we'll just say, their website's actually gone down now. The publication that said that they were responsible and it was one of their balloons has a number of kind of DoD connections that a few people have pointed out are quite shady. And now their website is down. So obviously that's sending everyone's conspiracy flags up. But it could just be that they know that they will be fined for those Sidewinder missiles. They'll have to pay the bill for all of those operations. And so they're like, crap, take the website down. It wasn't us. We haven't done anything. What's a balloon? Let's just pretend. So that's really interesting. But as Nathan and Ryan kind of both touched on, we have to be open to learning and to having our ideas challenged, because daily there are new things that just make you kind of wonder, what direction this is going in. We can all agree that the government is just oozing confusion in its messages. It raises questions. This whole situation raises questions about readiness and response to potential threats from anything in the airspace that they don't know what it is. That led to Biden kind of declaring that there's going to be an interagency UAP task force, which is amazing because that's what we wanted this whole time. It's basically saying, look, AARO isn't fit for purpose. We need something better to be looking at all of these things and giving them out to the correct departments. So the people that look at drone threats can identify those threats and deal with them. But that does leave that nice, tidy pile of anomalous data for us that is what we're interested in. Something curious, just to kind of finish off, is that NASA's study, they have been quietly updating their page as they've gone along. They haven't updated it with a lot. But when they announced their study, their website said that they were looking at unidentified aerial phenomena. Now, after this whole debacle, they've actually changed that definition to unidentified anomalous phenomena. So even though the news has kind of broadened out this scope to kind of be like, oh, UAP or balloons, NASA are kind of going, actually, no, we're going to include this anomalous kind of term because it kind of pushes the balloons out of the way. Then that's not what we're interested in. They clearly want to learn something, and they want to use their scientific instruments to help kind of demystify this whole thing.
I just hope at the end of the day the balloon club aren't too deflated. I can't even say that with a straight face. Sorry, I was sitting on that for about 3 minutes there.
Yeah, can tell.
Yeah. I had to do it. But
maybe that's why the Sidewinder missed. They popped it and it was doing the kind of thing the balloons do.
Yeah, I made my first ever TikTok video, and it was the up video of the house and up going up with the balloons, and then the Chinese balloon being shot down. Listen, let's open up our own radar and move from nuts and bolts into a little bit more of the spiritual side of things in the UFO topic. So Chris Bledsoe Senior, his book UFO of God, released a couple of weeks early and is pretty big news in the UFO world right now. So we'll get some thoughts on that. This was from Well Behaved Dogs on YouTube, and basically asked, he or she said, I would like to hear more discussion regarding the Bledsoe family and Chris Bledsoe's huge amount of uploaded videos of orbs on Instagram. Nathan, come to you first on that. I don't know if you've even managed to pick up the book yet. I'm just starting to read it in preparation for Chris Bledsoe coming on the podcast next week or so. What your thoughts been?
That's great. I'm glad you're getting a chance to talk to him. Yeah, I did pick it up. I've started it. I haven't finished it. Of course, I'm familiar with a lot of the stories from Chris Bledsoe, having heard him speak many times. I'm familiar with kind of many of the events of the last year, and some of the anecdotes from the story as well that I'd heard about through some other channels. I'm glad that it's out there. I'm glad that he's telling his story. I think we can't separate the Chris Bledsoe from the experience, right? So that's one of the challenges with, and all of us have talked to experiencers. It's one of the challenges of trying to gain insight from what people are experiencing, because it is so entwined with who they are, what they bring, the context that they bring, their interpretive framework for the experience. It's difficult to kind of take that out. Jacques Vallée has done a good job, I think, over time of looking at what is actually happening and trying to separate the detail from the interpretation. And that's something that I would encourage readers to do of Chris's story. Look at what he's experiencing. How can you sort of, the best that you can, take out the experience, the detail from that, and separate that from the interpretation of it. We're still going to have to make an interpretation. Let's be clear. We can't not do that. But I think we want to make sure we're not just taking at face value whatever interpretation Chris Bledsoe may be bringing to the experience. Now, he's closest to it, and I respect his interpretation. He's living it out. He's experiencing that. And I think we need to take it seriously, what he is willing to share with us about those experiences, how it has impacted him and his family personally, and what he thinks it means for the world. There are some big things there that I don't think we can ignore. And also there are things about his experience that are in parallel to many of the experiences that we've all heard, that, the world is in sort of a kind of state of peril in a way, that there is danger that there is there. There are some beings that are trying to help us, in Chris's case, the lady trying to help him. There are people whose lives are upended because of these encounters. And then the last thing that I think is really key to Chris's story, maybe more so than many others, is the degree of official interest in what took place. That to me gives it a ton of credibility that there were so many different agencies involved, both then and I think continue to be involved with what Chris is experiencing and trying to understand what is taking place with Chris Bledsoe personally and at his property. What can we learn from that? Because as we all know, it's difficult to pin the phenomena down into a laboratory setting. We really have to go where it's happening. So we're going to go to places like Skinwalker Ranch. We're going to go to places like Chris Bledsoe's house, trying to figure out what's taking place because things seem to happen there. We have a lot of documented examples of that, both not just from his orb videos, which I know some people can be very frustrated with, but people who have been with him and have seen things happen. I know people who have had that experience, and it's hard to discount that. And I think that, to me, is what it really does kind of move things forward. I don't know about you guys. I'm at the place now where I don't need another video. Like the videos are actually like I almost kind of don't even want to watch videos anymore because to me they're just their distraction. But when someone tells me that they've had an experience and I trust that person, I take that very, very seriously. And I think that that's what's happening here with Chris. It's kind of again, I'm going to come back to kind of my bigger perspective. It's giving people permission to come forward with what they are experiencing and say, this also happened to me and I don't understand it. And here's a person who was brave enough to, publish their story and people take him seriously. Well, maybe people will take me seriously. The more Chris Bledsoes we have, the better off we are.
Dan, we've talked about the Bledsoe story publicly and privately a few different times, haven't we? And echo some of the thoughts of Nathan there. On the aspect of the question from Well-Behaved Dogs on the uploaded videos of orbs, you've got far more of a deep interest and understanding of light phenomena and ball lightning, orb type objects than I do. What are your thoughts then on the Bledsoe story? And I'll just be really honest, and I'll say this to Chris, that some of the videos that I see uploaded, not to take away from what he may be experiencing, like Nathan says, don't look anything dissimilar to satellites to me. And I think I said something very similar to Ryan when I spoke to Ryan Bledsoe as well, that it can be hard with a camera phone at, several thousand feet away to differentiate that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been really interesting seeing Ryan come into the conversation for that reason, because until that point, it was kind of a single source story, right? And those were thrown into Room 101 by Sean Cahill. So, it's nice kind of getting that, the family expanding on it. And on Ryan's podcast, he's had on like his sister, the other brother, and they've all talked about these anomalous experiences throughout their lives. So it's very clear that something is happening. What that something is what's up for debate. There's clearly a lot of IC involvement. We have people like Tim Taylor, go in and interacting with them. Lou Elizondo and Tom DeLong went to meet Chris to retrieve some material from them. So there's, to use that phrase that a lot of people kind of hate, there's a there. Mm-hmm. Now, what that there is the big question. The whole thing with the lady is really curious. That just makes me think of all the Marian apparitions that have happened over all the years that the Catholic Church has, kind of signed off and authenticated a lot of them. And their experiences, just like Chris's, where you have a lady who appears that seems to communicate a warning to humankind and, we'll visit them again. And every time the lady appears, she seems to ask the person to bring more and more people to her to kind of communicate this. Now, that's really interesting, not just from the lens of UFO, but also from the lens of thinking of things like Project Bluebeam, where supposedly technology would be used to show people their specific religious figures that would mean something to them, to get them to act in the world in a certain way. This, fits the bill. Not saying that that's where it is, but I see involvement, a little government technology. There could be someone messing with Chris here, but there's clearly an inciting incident that Chris had that seems to come from that. He hit that kind of really low point, with his Crohn's disease. He thought that was it, and then this lady appeared to him, and he had this UFO encounter, which kind of runs through a lot of different experiences. The cover is really interesting to me. It's Salvatore Mundi, which is a lost Da Vinci painting, supposedly. And the interesting thing about that cover and that painting is that painting has never been authenticated as a real Da Vinci. It's a bunch of different people feeding into each other's myths and pulling the wool over each other's eyes. And I wonder if that cover is kind of a little clue as to what's going on. Not necessarily that Chris would know about it, if someone is kind of playing with him in that way. But I'd be curious to talk to him about that and to ask him about that.
Yeah,
The
fair
whole
point.
thing makes me think of like the phrase phenomenology, where we all kind of, depending on our upbringings, depending on where we live, depending on the friends we have and the people around us, we all see the world through a different lens. And it's very clear that Chris's lens is a religious lens, and that's what's important to him. And so that kind of gets, this experience is defined in that way. And not everyone's kind of into that angle. There's that famous quote from Star Wars, Star Trek even, where Shatner says to a being that purports to be God, what does God need with a spaceship? Which is, bang on. God wouldn't need a spaceship. So it makes you wonder, the second that cognitive manipulation comes into the picture, which supposedly these things can do, all better off. You can present as you want to present. You can make people see what you want them to see, think what they want them to think. And so it's important, like Nathan said, to have these experiences shared so we can all kind of go, you know what? None of us understand this. None of us know what this is. The more data we have, and the better, and we can start painting a picture, even if it's a picture of being manipulated by something. What I love about Chris's story is the human element and how much it's changed him, because that's something that we probably will hear more about going forward. But films like Witness of Another World really lean into that, and it changes people's lives, and not always for better either. People don't ask for this stuff, and yet here it is upending their life and making them lose friends and loved ones, and just being alone. And it's really strange that happens. In terms of the light phenomena, over the years I've been saving so much from Ryan and Chris that they've posted, and I'd agree, like a lot of them, some they look like just satellites coming over the horizon and things like that. But then the curious part of it is that in some close-ups, for example, there's one picture I have that Ryan said, oh, this was a dog, a spirit of a dog that's kind of coming back, and these orbs are actually kind of like craft that the souls can be in to express themselves here. And in the orb, you can actually see a dog face. And I'm not saying, it might be pareidolia. People just seeing what is suggested is there, like the blue dress, and the monkey with a basketball kind of thing.
Yep.
But it's a question mark, right? Like, none of us can tell Chris that he's making this up. None of us can tell Chris exactly what this is. It's another data point, and it's really important to just hold it lightly and take it seriously.
Well, no one knows better about the human experience of the UFO topic than Ryan. You wrote a whole book on it, didn't you? And your presentation on it I've seen a few times as well. The experience is well known. I think for me, like I say, and I was very honest with Dan, and I've said on the podcast before, a lot of the orb stuff I struggle to get on board with, because so much of it does just look like lights at a distance. And I'll, like Nathan said, though, I'm very happy to take people's testimony at face value, which I think is fair. But the amount of interaction with intelligence community officials, and others, is very, very intriguing. This isn't just someone taking pictures of lights in the sky, posting them online and saying, I'm having an experience. Is there more than something of interest to this than you? What are your thoughts on the whole Bledsoe story?
Yeah. I mean, I have sort of a funny story connected with Chris. For years, even before I'd written my book, the first edition of my book came out in 2016. I'd been speaking to a MUFON field investigator almost 2 years prior to that about covering a case they'd investigated. And it was very dramatic, and it was life altering for the witness involved. And I went on to publish this story in my book, with the witness remaining anonymous because they did not want to be known. They didn't want their name out there. And then, as the years went on, I started presenting that story in lectures that I gave. And people started coming up to me and saying, I think I know who that witness is. I think I might know who you're talking about. And it took me almost 4.5 years for someone to finally come up and say, that's Chris Bledsoe. And I had no idea all this time that the anonymous witness I'd been speaking about was actually Chris Bledsoe. And that kind of, to me, speaks volumes that when he originally started talking about this, he did not want to be known. He didn't want notoriety. And that screams to me that this person just wants to get this off their chest. They're not out to be in every documentary or write a million books. Finally, Chris has put down everything he possibly could into one cohesive book. And I use the term cohesive, obviously, very loosely, as I'm sure all these experiences are very non-cohesive for Chris. So yeah, that's kind of my weird connection to this whole story is I'd been talking about it for years, not even knowing it was Chris Bledsoe because I hadn't heard his story before. Now that this book came out and I've started reading it, it embodies everything I stand for in ufology. This is my ufology. Chris has been dramatically affected by these events, no matter what they are. And what Nathan said in terms of interpretation, that's what fascinates me most about all of this, is how each individual interprets these experiences and integrates them into their lives moving forward. I've had so many people come to me and become spiritual or religious after an experience, or vice versa. You know, it kind of shatters their framework of everything they once believed, and now they have to pick the pieces up in a whole new light. And I think Chris has struggled for so many years with all these various phenomena happening to him. And then you mix in CIA, you mix in the military, and it's just like, again, I feel for him. I honestly do. I have my own thoughts and opinions on what some of these orbs and stuff might be. However, that doesn't take away from the other various experiences he's had, especially that initial one that kind of put all of this into motion. So for me, it really comes down to how did this change Chris Bledsoe's life, for better and worse. And as I'm reading the book, it's astounding the journey this guy has been on, and it's continuing to be written up until today. It's good to see him now finally coming out and putting his face out there and kind of just telling us what he thinks and feels this all could be. Not like telling us to believe it. I think that's what's most important. It's this is what he thinks is going on. These were the messages that were conveyed to him, and it's up to us as the readers if we want to accept that or not. And that's what this is all about. All of it. I mean, it's either you embrace it, you deny it, or like many of us, you kind of remain somewhere in between there. And that's kind of where I'm at right now. I think something definitely happened to this man. Clearly, for me to publish it in a book, not knowing it was him, that lends credibility for me, especially the investigators that initially looked into his case. That screams volumes of credibility as well. So yeah, that's my long-winded way of saying, read the book, just read it. Like, you don't have to believe it, but like it is worth your time. It's a very, very interesting story. And I can't wait to keep dissecting it.
So I got talking to someone who I work with the other day about the Bledsoe story in the book and a kind of bastardized version of what had happened to the Chris and the family. And when I mentioned, like, you know, the book coming out, that potentially there's going to be like a TV deal or movie deal in the works, like Ryan's podcast, they were a little bit suspicious on, well, that just sounds, you know, like money making and off the back of it. And, you know, but I made the point of in modern day, and I'm not comparing, I'm going to say this, the second coming of Christ to the Bledsoe story, right? But I'm going to get to why I'm saying that. In a modern setting, that is the best way to get any kind of word or message out there, is through different forms of media, you know, podcasts, books, movies, TV. And it made me think, and I ended up bringing up, is it, if you've ever seen or heard of the series The Second Coming? It was a TV series in the late 90s. Dan, I'm sure I've spoken to you about it before. Christopher Eccleston, the Doctor Who, was in it. And it was basically about, what if Jesus came back in modern times in the body of this 30-something-year-old normal guy. Literally nothing special about him at all. He And just very quickly, synopsis: he wakes up in like come running across a field, not knowing where he's been, and basically tells his friends and family, "I've been away for a few days. I'm Jesus re-embodied." He then puts a note out in a newspaper, I think it is. Bear in mind, this was the late 90s. It basically says to people, gather at this place and I'm going to perform some kind of miracle. I've just got a feeling, but I don't know what it is. He ends up going to like a football stadium. I'm pretty sure it's Sunderland. I'm not entirely sure, but I think it's Sunderland, something like that. And a massive beam of light hits the pitch. And it's then, how does the news media break this down? And it's, some say this is genuine, some say it's a miracle, some say it's some kind of light illusion, some say it's just a trick. And then it ends up, it's a really powerful kind of 2 or 3 part series about, it turns out, no, he actually is the second coming of Christ. And it's how the world deals with it. So if anyone wants to go and find it, you can get it online in different places. It's called The Second Coming.
So good.
But yeah, it just made me think of, well, what if that did happen these days? How would a spiritual entity reach out and get a message out to the world? Because going back 2,000 years, there were no books, no TV series, no podcasts, no social media, no news channels, no newspapers. So wouldn't that be the best way to get those types of messages out there? Even to go on to like the Aerial School documentary, for example, I asked Randall Nickerson, do you think the event happened then for him to make the documentary now to get the word out? And maybe the fact that it's been 30 or 40 years since some of these events doesn't actually matter. And it's just now the technology is there that we can get the word out. So I ended up having that kind of chat, and the person wasn't massively into UFOs. So they were a bit like, nah, I'm not sure. But I was almost convincing myself that I can see how in a modern setting, a lot of this stuff can be really difficult for folks to take. And I think that goes back to the classic UFO conversation, doesn't it? Of, yeah, what if it's not little green men coming from another planet? And you start to go into different realities, dimensions, physics, and all that kind of good stuff that we like talking about. And it just, the average person who doesn't have an interest in a UFO topic just taps out. They're like, nah, not for me, no more. And that's me gone. So yeah, so that's what I kind of thought. But yeah, The Second Coming, well worth a little look if anyone can find that online. Dan, I don't know if you off the top of your head, do you, where people can get it, but
I think it was BBC. I just searched on Google and it's in a few places. It's 2 episodes, so yeah, I highly recommend people sit down and watch it.
I think it was ITV.
Was it ITV?
There was adverts, yeah. But yeah, so it might be hard to find. But yeah, it's definitely worth watching if you can get it. It's probably on YouTube because it's that old now anyway. But well worth a watch, folks. Listen, let's crack on with a question from one of the patrons, Gnosis, long-term listener to the podcast. I'll now read the context to this as well because he always puts a lot of context. He wants us to talk about the elephant in the room. AARO. So this was the department the whole community was banking on to get the kind of public-facing investigation we had been craving. AARO was our big victory, the jewel in the crown that Elizondo, Mellon and co were working towards. But what we now know is that not only has the department been understaffed with just 3 people, but come crunch time and multiple UAP incidents take place officially in US airspace, there's radio silence from this department and the White House act as if it doesn't exist. We see a congressional call for additional funding for AARO, but after the disappointment and delays with the last report, it feels AARO is yet again a token gesture with no clout. My feeling is that disclosure is coming, but it won't be coming via AARO, and that this department is simply a focus point for Congress to keep this topic alive in the halls of power. Dan, I'll let you kick off with that one.
So I'm going to ask you to repeat the question again because I was looking for the second come-in to give you guys the link.
You were typing away. Ryan, listen, go with Ryan first. Dan, I'll put
Sure.
the question in the because it was a body of it, okay? And you can read that one, and we'll go to Ryan first, okay?
Yeah, sure. It's interesting. I know once Biden made that announcement about this interagency opening up, I think it was the War Zone the following day came out with their story, Broken Arrow. Like, where is Arrow in all of this? And it's frustrating to learn that this group, that a lot of these individuals behind the scenes have been kind of working to get funded, to get established, was announced, and then were not going to be used for the very purpose in which all these events unfolded. I know that I believe it was Sean Kirkpatrick was present at the classified briefings on these 3 objects shot down. So it's clear that AARO is involved. It's not that they just aren't a part of it, but it is, as you mentioned, just a few people. They're still looking for additional funding, as we've seen through Senator Gillibrand and Rubio, and this call to get more funding for this thing. And I also heard too from various people who spoke to AARO that they're working on a shoestring budget. It took them almost like 4 months to get back to me about. They invited me to come speak with them, and it took them almost 4 months to finally get back to me. That's how kind of limited their resources are right now. So yeah, I think what we're seeing right now is the group is established, it's there, but it's baby steps. And what better way than to kind of what's the term, kind of just dive right in, I guess. Here's 3 unidentified objects that we shot down. Okay, AARO. Um, we're gonna see what you can do with this. So I think what we're seeing is AARO is involved in everything going on right now, but it's not just them. They're getting people from the different various agencies and whatnot involved too. So yeah, I think right now it's kind of we're still yet to see what AARO is capable of. And this is just the beginning. So yeah, I look forward to whatever comes out in their next report on what everything going on right now. That's what I'm really looking forward to. That when the next report comes out, will we finally find out what those 3 unidentified objects were, or will they once again say balloon-like entities? I don't know, but yeah, I'm not giving up on AARO just yet. I have hope that the reason they're there will be put to good use. And I look forward to whatever happens next with it.
Yeah, I can feel that disappointment from Gnosis. I think it reminds me of when a massive football team in the UK have a billionaire owner or company behind them, and they say they want a fan group to come on the board and have a representative to sit amongst all these multimillionaires and billionaires to help make decisions for the good of the football club. That person has no real power, and they've got that token representative seat to make it feel like the fans are justified and they're represented. And I hope it doesn't become like Gnosis has sort of said, it's just something for Congress to think that they're keeping the foot in the door and not letting the door fully close over. So yeah, I'm still on the fence with as to what we can see AARO actually produces. And I think I was very fair with Dan in the last breakdown when the report came out that the next report from AARO is a big one in terms of, are they going to be any use whatsoever to the general public going forward? Or, not to say they won't have their uses in the background, but if it's another nothing burger, as people like to call them, I think for many that'll be the kind of AARO's kind of served its purpose, and it'll be turning a blind eye to it from then on in. Dan, have you had time to read the body of the question?
I have. Thank you for giving me that time. I appreciate
No,
that.
you're all right.
Nothing burger is an interesting phrase because plenty of people just eat salad burgers, right? We have to remember that the AARO was a repurposing of UAPTF. That was where it started. We're not looking at, like Gnosis called it, the crown jewel. This isn't what it is. This is essentially an organization that came from an arm wrestle between senators and the DoD. The UAPTF was announced to kind of stave off that congressional oversight that people like Gillibrand were calling for. And AARO was it was announced before the new legislation came in. So even when we're looking at the report that came out this year that was written by AARO, it was fulfilling the mandate from last year's NDAA. And for that reason, I'm looking forward to the next one. And I know people in the UFO community always say, oh, the next one's going to be the one. But I think you're absolutely right in terms of saying that's where we're really going to see the worth of it, and to see whether Sean Kirkpatrick is really wanting to do a great job of looking at UAP and helping define it and figure it out, or whether it's just wheel spinning from the DoD. For me, it's a start. It's not the whole thing. It did start from a gesture from the DoD. The arm wrestle is very present, and you can kind of see these internal factions kind of trying to leapfrog each other to control this story. The Air Force is very quiet. The Navy is kind of running forward with this. And now we've got the administration running forward with this because Biden's taken it upon himself to announce the interagency task force off the bat of these balloons. it's really interesting. I think the interagency solution would be better just because it allows them to pool all the resources properly and do it in a way that it isn't colored by the oversight of people like Susan Goff and her superiors that, we don't know the names of. The sooner that effort gets started, the better for me. That is the crown jewel. That's what we want. This should be a worldwide conversation. This week, we've heard that Canada is looking into it. The UK is still really quiet. I expect maybe in the next year they'll say, oh yeah, maybe we will pay a little bit of attention here. But yeah, it's clear that AARO isn't fit for purpose. But good faith argument. We'll see how it goes forward and give them a chance to see if they can right that ship.
And Nathan, on AARO, performance review.
It's the Aerophant in the room. So I've been waiting on that one. You such appreciate that, Eddie.
Absolutely.
I think you can imagine it was a little bit of a political gamesmanship happening there when this whole balloon debacle took place, and the executive, sort of making the decision to implement an executive working group tasking an official group to deal with this. It looks better for the executive to have that initiative and have the, kind of, we're taking action, we're doing something. And you saw this in the rhetoric too. The politicians were saying, wait, we already had something, like, why don't we just fund the thing that we've on a bipartisan basis already created, and let's just build out the framework that we've already had in motion. From the executive perspective, it's like, well, we need the political points here. We need to look strong. We need to look like we have our arms around this, that we're in control. And so they're implementing something that sounds like a thing an executive would do. Like that's like the classic thing an executive would do. You've built this awesome thing down in the lower department. Well, I'm going to steal it, and it's my idea now, so we're doing it. And the whole company's on board. And in the lower department, people are like, we've been talking about this for years. So I think that's a little bit of what's happened here. If I could kind of use that as a corporate analogy, it ultimately is a win overall, I think, because it is a higher level, higher profile effort here. I would also, though, I think, ask folks to consider, what is wrapped up in the entire exercise of disclosure. I mean, this is obviously a huge topic we could go down into here, but where does it come from? Who should it come from? How is it going to happen? And what is it really about? What does it really mean? And I think I take very seriously some of the insight that I've gotten from folks like Frank Milburn, who've talked about this from a state level perspective. If we're talking about the kind of technology that is literally paradigm shattering and game changing, our government, any state government, is not going to show all of its cards right away. It would be irresponsible of them to do that. So I think we have to, in some ways, temper our expectations from the state in terms of what they're going to ultimately share with us. I do want the state to take it seriously, and I think that's exactly what we're seeing happen. But I would caution folks to sort of put all of their hope, all of their eggs in a government disclosure basket, because I don't know that that's really going to happen. And I would also argue that maybe that it shouldn't happen that way, that there's something about disclosure, about this phenomena generally, that is not something that is going to come from the top down. In a way, it has to come from the bottom. It has to come from an individual level and percolate up through the society. And this is interesting because I want to make a quick tie-in to Chris Bledsoe, because and many other experiencers who've had encounters, it's a deeply personal experience that they have that changes the way they look at the world. It changes the way they look at their family and their lives. And they feel a sense of change, but it also it catalyzes them to want to act in a broader way. One of the very first things Chris did when he had these encounters, he started planting a garden in his yard. He thought he was going to have to feed his neighborhood because he thought literally the world was ending. He was going to have to kind of provide for people in his community. So you can see how that individual change led to other changes, looking.
We'll give it a second. Is you guys, Ryan and Dan are still there? Nathan's gone.
Someone's hacking the feed.
Yeah, Nathan was making too good a point there. We'll give Nathan a few seconds to come back on. Do any of you want to come in on that so we can just keep kind of going?
Yeah, so recently, I've said it a few times, I've been watching Three Body Problem series. That adaptation was out there. And something that Nathan said was actually really interesting in regard to that. So something that Species does in that show is it sends something to Earth to mess with science. And the whole point of them doing that is to make people on Earth question scientists, to make them question the narratives of people, and to make people look crazy, so that when they're told stuff about the visitors, people just don't believe it. It's essentially, like I mentioned with the cognitive manipulation stuff, it's information warfare on a whole different level than we're used to. You nudge a few people here and there, and you make people switch off to certain causes and things like that. Just look at the Israeli space chief that spoke a few years ago. He said some really interesting things about like galactic kind of federations and things like that, and it seems so out there that a lot of people just switched off to it. What if he was telling the truth? I'm not saying that he was, but just what if? And it's just too much for us. So it kind of speaks to the need to do it slowly and deliberately. But it makes me wonder who could tell the truth that people these days would trust, because it's not the government. And a lot of people don't believe in science. We've seen that through COVID. So where would it come from?
I think any of us pick or choose, don't we, as to what's the kind of what's that point with this topic. And I find this on the Discord chat really interesting with some of the guys who'll be like, and some of the girls in there, where people will be making a point and really interested, and then they'll go to abductions and then really out there experiences, and people will say, nah, that's where the topic kind of loses me. And it's that breaking point for them of that's too much. And I think that the Israeli stuff about the Galactic Federation, and it's when it starts to sound too Star Trek-y, I think I start to go, no, you've lost me. But like you say, why not? As someone who's got like a story, I seen a UFO that was the size of like a Ferris wheel, not that far from me in the mid-90s. People would just think I make that up anyway. But I have to think and go, well, that sounds ridiculous. Because if someone told me that story and I had never seen that myself, I would think, yeah, no, not for me. So you have to give people that, well, okay, if that's your story, as incredible as it sounds. And I've mentioned before, like the folks that'll sit on one of the documentaries from last year that had like the hybrid babies stuff, and I start to get a little bit when it comes to that, and people say they've been impregnated and it's been taken away, and there's this hybrid race living on the planet. And Nathan's came back on right at that point, and he's going to be like, well, where did this go? But just talking about Nathan, those points in the UFO topic where it's enough for you, and you struggle to really not believe, but hold credibility in certain aspects of it. People have different areas where they have to go, no, for me that's kind of enough. Dan had mentioned the Galactic Federation stuff before, but yeah, he'd picked up on a point that you made talking about the three body problem and one of the species. Dan, what was it, just off the back of what Nathan had said?
Yeah, so one of the species in it sends something to Earth that manipulates science and essentially makes scientists sound crazy so that people stop trusting it. And then when it comes to scientists talking about life out there, people just don't believe them. So essentially the point we were getting at is that, people don't trust the government, people don't trust science, as we've seen in the last few years. So who is an authority for this? And Andy rightfully said that, we each kind of have a different source of authority. But it's a really interesting discussion point, I thought.
Yeah, completely. And I apologize for that. Because we're having a storm here, but all of it is crazy, right? I mean, that's the thing. And I think that, I try to take a perspective of looking at history and looking at kind of paradigm shifts that happen in history, and what that must have been like for those that were on the fringes of understanding the world. People who, like Galileo, a great example, who had this understanding, this insight about the world that was totally different than everything around him, the world that he grew up in. And, it takes a very long time for those insights to permeate and spread around the rest of society. And until they do, you are the crazy person. You are out there. You are on the fringe. which is not to say that every person on the fringe has some amazing insight about reality. But it does say that's how it would happen, right? So that consensus reality isn't just, I think we've gotten accustomed to this, right? That the way in which we know things is just going to incrementally grow, because the scientific method has taught us that's how knowledge grows. It's just this incremental expansion of information, and it's very predictable, and it's very safe and comfortable, and that's just how it works. And we're all nodding along because that's how we've lived that experience. I've lived that experience. That's how it works. But the truth is, like, if you think about how big the universe is, like, it's the amount of hubris that you would have to say, like, well, yeah, I guess we've kind of cracked it now. So our awareness going forward is always going to be this neat, clean, incremental progress. And we're never going to be blindsided. We're never going to be surprised that we may have it all wrong. And I think that's what the phenomenon is really saying, quite frankly, is that
the storm might have just got Nathan again there, but I think we'll leave his point there and we'll get him back in. I'm going to move on because I think this will fit nicely into some of the stuff we were talking about there in terms of... Nathan, we just lost you. But you, at the point you'd made, it sounded kind of nice to round off there. I'll move on just when you'd cut off and come in with Ryan. Peter wanted to know about Gary Nolan's comments he'd made recently on a podcast, I believe it was UAP Studies, about shadow biosphere. And he basically said, Gary Nolan claims he has seen data from a couple of groups where they have had extraordinary interactions with something, apparently in some sort of experiment or test. They managed to once, it couldn't repeat, but they saw once that something basically was communicating with them. I don't know if any of you saw that comment. That was the gist of it. Gary Nolan, for me, is one of those incredibly credible individuals, someone I listen when he speaks, and I don't think he just throws out statements, just for the sake of it to give himself a laugh. I don't think he's that type of guy. As wonderful a sense of humour he has. What are your thoughts on that? And I suppose if you haven't heard those comments, it'd be a bit of speculation, but as to the who and the what would be involved in that. Oh, you're on mute. Lol.
There we go. I haven't looked much into this concept of the biosphere. However, I think this kind of speaks to this larger, I guess, theory that a lot of people have posed of if the phenomena has been there all along right next to us. We've heard people like Elizondo talk about this, or Gary Nolan, or Jacques Vallée even. This idea of something being there all along and us not really knowing it. So I think that's really interesting that Gary would bring something like that up and pose those theories, and even go as far as to say experiments have been done to try to unlock that, or find that something that's been right next to us all this time. So yeah, I think it's really fascinating. I'd really want to look more into it before I make any actual thoughts or formulated opinions on it. But yeah, I think again it kind of speaks to this broader idea that the phenomena itself doesn't just always come from above or even below. It could be all around us all the time, and we're just getting these small glimpses every now and again. And yeah, I find it all fascinating, but I am in no place to comment any further there than that on it, I think.
For me, and there wasn't much more to it, Ryan, than that comment. He wouldn't give any details, obviously, as to who it was and what had happened, but just that he saw some incredible data. Dan, I'll come to you. It made me think immediately Skinwalker Ranch NIDS type situation where and I think I asked Lou and Brandon Fugel and stuff about this as well, have they ever tried to communicate with whatever it was, and was it successful? And we've heard from George Knapp and others about, various games and stuff being left out, and things have been kind of played with, toyed with, messed about, but this sounded a bit further and more technically advanced than that.
Yeah, it's the shadow biosphere is such an interesting conversation because we're constantly finding these new biospheres. I think it was like 1850s. A doctor, I want to say Semmelweis, he was the guy that came up with the basic idea of washing your hands before you do surgery. Before that point, doctors were losing people left, right, and center because they didn't realize that germs existed. That was a shadow biosphere that we uncovered. My mom, when she was growing up, she used cleaning solutions that would leave 80% of what modern day cleaning solutions would kill on the table, and she didn't care. She didn't know that it was there. She didn't interact with it. She didn't think about it. And now she just wants to kind of just bleach the whole house, because of this biosphere that exists that she didn't know about 50 years ago, and she wants to deal with it. It's really interesting. Life isn't what we think. We're constantly expanding our definitions and ideas about what exists and what can exist. Scientists now are talking about, the multiverse, about dimensions, and what kind of is at the bottom of the universe. And there's some ideas that, it's just information based, and we're kind of in a holographic representation of that. So if life could be in just that information, what does that look like? How do we talk to that when we make things like general AI? Is that what we're making? Can it get away from the computer and just live in this basic level of the universe and interact with people? That kind of stuff would lead to encounters that Peter Lavender kind of hinted at, where if there was a being like that came to the planet and we all had a simultaneous dream of contact, then that denotes contact. Like, what is communication? These definitions are things that we need to kind of start thinking about. Does the Tic Tac, reacting to David Fravor, does that constitute communication? I'd say so, but some people would say no, not at all. We live in a dimension that I think I might get this wrong, but it's 3 of space, 1 of time. You change that equation in any way, something else could live there, and that space could be a space that it can only function in. So how would we interact with that? How would they build machines that worked at our level? And that just takes me to thinking about the idea of secret machines, or as if you want to expand on that, secreted machines. To interact at our level, or a smaller space or a bigger space, we would have to build machines in that space. So maybe a wormhole isn't a doorway. Maybe it's a manufacturing point to create something that can operate in our reality. This subject, I love it because it kind of gets so sci-fi, and you really get to kind of, just wax lyrical on it. So I'll leave it there. But yeah, it's really interesting considering what communication with other beings could look like.
It gets very Ant-Man.
Yeah.
Quantumania, obviously the latest one where, he's been shrunken down but gets big when he's small and all that kind of stuff. And they were trying to talk about that in the film. And but yeah, Nathan and yourself, well, we've got a good connection still as well. It looks like all's good. You're back. Shadow Biosphere comments, Gary Nolan saying he's seen data from a few groups. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I just would echo what Dan said, and Ryan as well. And this kind of obviously fits along with the point I was making, that we're going to be interrupted by something that we're not expecting, essentially. That we'll have discoveries that will come at us from sort of vectors that we're not prepared for, and those will result in some pretty tectonic changes in the way we understand who we are and our place in the universe and all those things. I think AI is already starting to kind of give us some hints there that there is a lot going on that we don't quite understand. The way that it can kind of synthesize information and repackage that and provide it to us. You can only imagine the amount of information that exists in the human library right now. And so many disciplines that never talk to each other, that never have any interaction whatsoever. But now we have a platform which can look at that information, look for similarity, draw new conclusions that have never been drawn just by connecting some of these pieces of research and insight. And I think that that's really exciting, but it's also going to be very destabilizing, just like it would be when we encounter a shadow world that we didn't know was there the entire time. I mean, wait, you're telling me germs are everywhere. Well, how afraid should I be? What do I need to do? Are they going to assault me? What's happening there? And so I think but we learn to live with them. That's the lesson from the germ discovery. We learn to coexist with them in ways where we can preserve a sense of who we are, but we've integrated that awareness into our understanding. And I think that's where we are headed. But the integration with this topic, whatever this is, I think is going to be profound, and it's an amazing time to be alive.
So it doesn't sound like you prescribe to the old germ threat narrative that is purported out there by people. You're more peaceful, coincide, love and light germs is what you go with. Is that right?
The love and light germs, exactly.
You don't believe in Domestos, any of those bleach products that are out there?
Ultimately, the germs are good for us. Yeah,
that's it. You can kill too many of them, can't you? But do you know what? And some of the stuff you said there, Nathan, I don't know if you saw. Dan, I'm guessing you will have, and Ryan, I don't know if you will have. Theory of Everything, Kurt Mungel's recent interview with Leslie Keane, and Ryan, you're saying you've seen it as well. I wasn't sure. She talked about in 10 years' time how different she thinks the world's going to be, given sources she's spoken to. And I know Ross Coulthart has said various things like this as well, that she mentioned geopolitically, but also in terms of the UFO topic and discoveries that are going to be made and whatnot, that it's going to be very difficult for us to have the same way of life we have now, given things that will come out, we'll discover, and just the way the world will go. Again, do you think that very much pertains to the discoveries around the UFO topic, UAPs?
Yeah. This is a tricky one, right? I think all of us, we've talked to enough experiencers, we've read enough encounters where we are a little bit, I'm trying to think of the right phrasing. There's a little bit of fatigue to this sort of, cataclysm narrative, which I think is the subtext of what she's getting at there. So it's nothing new. We've heard that before, over and over. So the way I look at that, though, is that there's something true to this insight of endings. Endings have been a part of our story for a long time. Apocalyptic endings are a part of most of our mythologies. There's something ingrained in the human psyche, if you will, that whether it's just a existential dread or not, I don't know, but it's a part of who we are. And I think we need to wrestle with both the macro idea of that and the personal idea of that, because the reality is one day the world does end for you, right? The world literally ends as you know it, and something else lays beyond that. And so whether that's happening globally or happening individually, in a way, is in some ways kind of irrelevant. And I think we need to maybe not worry so much about how it ends and focus on who we are in the face of that ending. And that's to me the biggest takeaway to the whole thing.
Dan, Ryan, one of you want to come back in on that? Again, Leslie's comments.
Yeah, I'll touch on it briefly. I mean, I did catch that part of the conversation. I think it was towards the end. How appropriate of the interview. And it's weird. I've met with Leslie. I've had conversations with her. We all have, and that was one of the first times I've really seen her talk about something so kind of uh, definitive or almost sobering or sombering even. And that kind of brings me back to Kurt also asked her what would the public think if they knew the amount of stuff you knew about all this, and that's been asked of Elizondo and all these other people who allegedly have more information than the public has, and they all sort of say the same thing. And are they feeding off one another, or do they all really personally believe if the public knew what was really going on with the phenomena, it would be a very sombering revelation. And this is kind of what I'm looking at right now. It's not going to be the answers we want. It's not going to be the answers that a lot of people expected. It's probably going to be far more uh, complex and possibly even disturbing, but also paradigm shifting. Like Nathan said, I think every story has an end, and eventually all of us are going to come face to face with that in our own lives. It's a matter of, like you said, how you integrate that into your life and how you live that journey and pursue, I guess, that mystery rather than what is it. When is it going to happen? When is the end? Or is it going to be apocalyptic? I personally can't live my life that way, thinking that way. So yeah, it was interesting to hear Leslie talk like that. I've never really heard her talk like that in an interview before. I have absolutely no idea what she could have meant by it, other than, we're all going to have to face some very hard truths when the truth does eventually out on a lot of this stuff. And that I don't look at it as good or bad. I look at it as it's a learning process, and it's where we go from there. So yeah, I think it was interesting, and yeah, just not the Leslie I know, and not the Leslie that I think a lot of us hear a lot of the time. So that was interesting.
Dan, just before you make your point on it, I'll frame the question to you in this way: that if anyone's out there and they think, oh my God, this is like apocalyptic in the terms of, Armageddon type, Independence Day, end of the world type scenarios, would Leslie Kane, Ross Coulthart, Lou Elizondo, and anyone in the past, present, or future who's going to speak about those types of events happening, if they knew about those being truly world ending, would they be wasting their time writing books or giving us any of their time sitting on podcasts or speaking at conferences if they knew that was coming? I don't think so. If it was going to be, that sort of Terminator 2 Judgment Day scenario, but more of a, like you say, paradigm shift. There's going to be a way of thinking that changes, aspects of a way of life changes, or do you think they are just nice enough to give us their time in the face of impending doom?
I would like the time of day, so I know whether to get up early to do my hair, stuff like that. Yeah. It'd be good instead of just like the month. I want to know exactly when.
Yeah.
But you're totally right. Revelations, they're new beginnings. They're shifts. They're not endings. And where I currently am in Mexico, something has become very, very clear to me. The encounter between the Maya and the conquistadors is often spoken about as, when an advanced species comes in, they wipe out the indigenous species. That's not true. They're still here. Their ancestors are still here. They're still practicing the rituals. They didn't go away. Life transformed. And it transformed for the invaders too. What happened, like a whole bunch of people switched sides and loved the way of life here and wanted to preserve it. And now the culture that you have is this kind of mishmash of two things, and resulted in something that neither side thought they would ever be a part of. And I think that subtlety is worth considering. Like we say, it's not an ending, it's a new beginning. It's a transformation into a way of life that you were not accustomed to before. Science often comes from left field. It's not a comfortable kind of like, oh yeah, we've got the PS5 now, so I know there's going to be a PS10. Chances are, Nintendo will make another Wii and totally blow the competition out of the water in a way that they weren't expecting. While you guys were talking about it, I just chucked into the AI Bing thing. I asked it what some of the cutting edge sciences that we should be paying attention to. And it gave me a few examples: synthetic biology, quantum computing, brain-computer interfaces, anonymous systems, geoengineering, synthetic chemistry, space exploration. All those things are manipulating space and matter. So imagine if you didn't need to go to a supermarket anymore. Imagine if you didn't need to sit on a website and fill your basket and then order it. You could just think about these things and they would materialize in front of you. It would totally change the world, and in ways that we're not expecting. This AI stuff is already doing that for us, right? Like, people are talking about the end of certain job roles and things like that, and how we serve the people who were doing those roles before. Do they just whittle away in society, or do we support them in another way? It's worth remembering as well that, and I'm going to quote the great It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia here, that science is a liar sometimes. The whole thing with Galileo, science advanced by kicking and screaming. He said, objectively, this is what's going on, and the world did not believe him. They locked him in a tower. They denied him, his life. And it's just these massive advancements always come with pain. Whether you think it's good or bad is kind of by the by. This is how we advance. 95% of the universe isn't known to us. It's dark matter, it's dark energy. There could be anything there. A 2-month-old could probably figure out more than 95% of snakes and ladders, and we think we know what consensus reality is. It's crazy to me that we act as if we know what's in the world when really we really don't. Just the idea of we touch things isn't even true. It's forces interacting between us, and those kind of subtleties with things like quantumania. People are going to start understanding these things in really simple ways, and it's astounding to think that someone that watches that movie and comes away kind of going, wait, so there could be life at a small scale? Like, what is the quantum world? That person knows more about the universe and is more cutting edge than the average person, or probably the average scientist 100 years ago. They're just further down the path. And that took us all to kind of discover and repackage and pass around and talk about. The afterlife was something that Leslie spoke about as well, which is really interesting. And consciousness studies are kind of going in that direction to kind of be like, what makes me me? What is my damnness? Like, is it different to Nathan or Ryan? Are we all just the same thing in different bodies, having different experiences, and that makes us who we are? It's a really, really interesting question. I'd recommend that people search out some of the peer-reviewed studies on the afterlife that Leslie spoke about on that show, because they exist and no one really has an answer. They're just mind-blowing. But ultimately, it all leads to us kind of asking ourselves, what does it mean to be human? Because our idea at the moment, the body, consciousness, how we look, not every human has 2 legs, 2 arms. We are all in different forms. And defining something other is going to also define ourselves in a way that we just aren't aware of right now. So as we go forward, we're going to be creating life. We're going to be manipulating matter and space. And that's going to really, really change how we see ourselves.
Some really good points. I just want to mention I'm not intelligent enough to think about some of these crazy ideas and work them out from kind of start to finish. So I try and really simplify complicated things so that they make sense to me. And when you're talking about, people might be thinking it's crazy that you can just think of ordering your shopping and it appears at your door. And I just think, well, actually, if we've got that process almost already. But if you look at Amazon, and I don't know if they still do them, a couple of years ago, you could order a button. For example, you could put a magnetic button on your washing machine that would link via your Wi-Fi to, when you press it, it would order new washing up powder, that brand, with a click of a button. So you didn't even have to go onto Amazon, log into your account, find the washing powder, order, put in your details. All that was done already. You just clicked the button and it ordered it for you. And I think of it this way, that all you actually need now for that process to work, like you said, Dan, is how do we remove the button? Because we've got all the rest of that information and process already there. And it's like a lot of this stuff in so many stages is there. It's just removing that one thing, like the television. I'm watching the football game. Yeah, but how could I be more immersed in that? How can you get me in the TV? That virtual reality side of things. How can you take away the helmet? How can you take away the glasses, the mask, the actual physical product? And it's just that next step, or maybe 2 steps away from some of these things being more possible and realistic than maybe people realise. And that's the way I kind of try and break down some of these ideas.
That's spot on, and that's so true. And you can kind of see it with, what Meta are doing with the VR stuff, where they're kind of going, we're going to make people an avatar and they can walk around in these spaces. And people are kind of going, why? I can go outside. Like, why would I need that? Like, that system will look different when they get it right. It'll kind of complement our reality. It won't replace it. We're not going to go into Ready Player One. But to your point about, entertainment and enjoying it, something like Neuralink could give us an experience of, I want to watch Endgame and experience all the emotions of Tony Stark and see how he feels and how he thinks as he goes through it. Shut my brain off as I'm doing it. I'm sure you'd love to watch a football game and be inside Ronaldo's head and kind of experience what it's like to be Ronaldo. And those kind of things, they're, maybe 10, 20, 30 years away. Like, it's not that far.
Yeah, absolutely. And listen, I've had, speaking of endings, we're getting towards the end of the time for all of you gents as well. So I want to fire through quickly a couple of ideas. So we'll keep it as short as possible. But recently, a few listeners, Xander, Joe, and a few other people asked about George Knapp on Weaponized, talking about the story that Al O'Donnell revealed that they had a live being at Area 51. This was told to a few different people. Your thoughts on the idea that on podcasts like Weaponized, we're now hearing these kind of stories coming out. I don't know if this was the same one, because I'm not fully up to date. And I know, Dan, you had messaged on the UAP media chat maybe about this, where someone said that one of the small humanoids resembled Ross Perot, who I don't know who that is, but everyone's nodding on camera. So, yeah, can someone fill me in on that one?
Yeah, I'm not a huge political person, but I do remember when Ross Perot ran for office. He's just this small, spindly dude with huge ears. He was, completely like fodder for SNL for a while.
Okay.
I think Dana Carvey played him, if I'm
Right.
correct in that.
Okay.
So the fact that a dead alien was not so much a gray, but was Ross Perot, definitely made me giggle when George Knapp brought that up. And then it also just plays into the absurdity of all of this.
Yeah.
Like, no, of course the alien wasn't a typical gray. It looked like Ross Perot, this like super obscure person who ran for office in the United States. So yeah, I thought that was pretty interesting when I heard it, and definitely got my attention.
Yeah. Those kind of revelations, are we going to get more of those, do you think, on Weaponized? Something that stood out to me is that on the first episode, they mentioned it wouldn't just be UFOs. They would go true crime, paranormal, and that's probably a good idea because I think there's a finite amount those guys could do without starting to dip into maybe the stuff that we cover on various different shows and formats, and I don't think that's what they're going for. So are we going to get some big revelations? I know Jeremy Corbell's already hinted at another high noon coming this Wednesday. Or do you see the podcast being more of a series? Dan, we kind of talked about that, didn't we, before, about is it going to be a continuing thing, or would it be better served being 6 shows and it goes away for a while, 6 shows and it goes away for a while?
Yeah, for me, I would, to be honest, I'd prefer them to kind of get the ducks in a row and present the information as whole pieces. I can understand that in today's media landscape, you kind of have to generate hype and get people talking about it, and that's what spreads the message. Recently, after they did the Mossel Orb reveal, Jeremy went on to CNN to kind of talk to them about some things, and that connection there, if they have more videos, it makes sense to use the connection to CNN to present them on the news program so that they're a bit more reputable going around. And I say that with a pinch of salt because there's a lot of people that will be groaning at me for saying the CNN is reputable out there. But that just speaks to our point about authority earlier, right? We need robust information presented. As much as I love these stories, they are just stories without that.
Fair enough.
Amen.
Yeah, I would agree. Yeah, Jeremy Corbell and George, they're doing a good job of, I think, bringing the energy up to the topic. These sort of, like highly caffeinated sound bites in a way, like, and that's kind of their thing. And Jeremy's great on camera. I think he's really compelling when he does interviews. So I do think we'll continue to see some interesting nuggets come out of that. I think regarding the alien, tidbit, I mean, that just fits along with what we've all heard for years that they're so that, to me, that just adds one additional data point to that story that there really was something there. Honestly, I've been looking a lot more at Ryan Graves' podcast, Merged. I thought that's the production quality is really, really good. And that's what I'm looking at to see how the consensus is changing. Because the more that he's bringing in these pilots who are just comfortable being like, yeah, I'm a lifetime pilot. I've flown people around the world. I've got thousands of hours in the sky. I mean, these are the most reputable people you could imagine. And he's got them, just seems like a never-ending supply of them willing to come forward and talk about their experiences. That, to me, is pointing at the stigma changing in a big way.
Do you know, for me, the Merged podcast idea, though, is that a sustainable long-term podcast in terms of format? Because how many pilots can you have on week after week talking about their experience? I would love to have seen that in the format of an episode of Leslie Kane's series, for example, or is that a 60 minutes piece on its own, where here we have Ryan Graves, an authority because of his background and experience and the way he speaks and how eloquent he is, and he's a handsome guy, so he's presentable on a television show, as you will know, Ryan, being one yourself.
Stop.
But is that something that's a hard-hitting 60 minutes piece where he gets them on back to back to back, 5 minutes, bang, 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 and that also translates to your TikTok clips, that translates to your YouTube shorts. Here are all these pilots in an hour on a massive national stage, which I think Ryan should have with that sort of thing, to go, here's the data being presented, as opposed to on a far less exposed platform, as big as YouTube is, merged isn't Joe Rogan, where you've got bang, back that information firing off. I don't know. I just think maybe that's the kind of stuff, way back at the start when Layla mentioned about the continuation. Could that have been on some other bigger piece?
I mean, I'll touch on that briefly, Andy. I think what we're seeing with Merged is kind of this is Ryan's pitch for everything he's doing right now and the progress he's made with the committee and with his new
Safe
established group.
aerospace.
Yeah, that he
Yep.
just announced. So what I see Merged as is, I don't know. I mean, none of us know like how long he's going to be doing it or whatnot. How many episodes there will be, but I see it as this is him showing this is what we need to be doing. We need to hear from the pilots. They
Yep.
need to because I can't tell you how many like commercial pilots probably saw the past few episodes of these other pilots coming forward and they're like, whoa, this is cool. Oh wait, so now there's somewhere I can go and report this. Awesome. So yeah, I think more than like really changing the conversation, I think what Ryan's doing is enriching the conversation and adding to the data. And I think this committee he established and this new group is only going to help. It's only going to help further the data and honestly, just keep our skies safe. Like Ryan has said, it's only going to take one of these things to collide for like everyone to be like, holy shit, we should have been paying attention to this all along. So yeah, I see Merged as kind of a really well done sales pitch for everything that Graves is doing right now with his groups and whatnot. So yeah, I think it's great.
I thought you were going to get in somewhere in the skies plug at some point there, just with the line you made, but it was close. You've got a chance to do that soon. Dan, you've got an AI ET joke.
Yeah, well, just before I kind of share this amazing, incredible artificial intelligence generated joke, I think that's a really good way of looking at Merge, Ryan. Like, to me, it comes across like the Lex Fridman of UFOs, right? Just exploring that. But I think at some point it's going to expand because we're kind of getting everyone to a point where we kind of go, okay, so there's a thing here, let's investigate. Then there's work to do. And that stuff isn't, scientists aren't going to be doing podcasts every day while they're investigating this stuff. They're going to investigate and present a peer-reviewed paper. So there's going to be a bit of quiet time while people figure this out. Something curious that if any pilots are watching, let us know, because recently this week there were kind of some Northern Lights appearances kind of a bit further south than usual, some in the UK. And there was an EasyJet pilot that was flying from Reykjavik to Manchester in the UK. And he actually changed course so that people on both sides of the planes could see it. And I thought that was really interesting because we're constantly hearing commercial pilots saying, while I was flying people, I couldn't go off course. Yeah, this pilot did. And EasyJet were like, yeah, we're happy that this guy did that and gave our passengers a great experience. So they can go off course to take a closer look at some phenomena, I guess, depending on how far away it is. But I'm curious, like, does that mean that if there was a UAP, the pilot could just turn to get a better photo of it? Like, it seems like a fairly cool thing to show passengers, and then we would have like a mass sighting in the air, right? So yeah, just to say that. But the ET joke, so why don't aliens visit our planet?
Go on.
It has terrible ratings, only 1 star.
That's actually not bad. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Is that from the AI? Yeah.
It is, yeah.
I'm sorry, AI. South Park's already done that.
Yeah, and if anyone wonders about AI and how advanced it is, and are we approaching Terminator 2 Judgment Day's levels of Skynet? No, because that's what we're using it for currently still. Quick thought as well, Ryan, MJ Jumps on YouTube had mentioned your Alex Dietrich interview that was really cool. Says, one thing that stands out to me is no one ever discussed the object in the water that the Tic Tac was engaging with. Is there any data or information on that? Quick one, general thoughts. I know, Dan, we've talked about this before. Was it a whale? Was it some other kind of craft under the water breaking the waves? Any thoughts, gents?
I'll just say it was. I'm glad he asked that, and I'm glad I was able to ask her about it. The problem here is, she's just a pilot, and she was sent up there to intercept the object in the air. She did say we went back to look for that that disturbance in the water, and it was gone. So and she literally said in the interview, it was the one time I think she kind of like got defensive with me. She was like, well, what the hell was I supposed to investigate? And I'm like, that's, yeah, that's a good point. I think what MJ Jones is trying to say is, was there a investigation
Yeah.
afterwards? And we just don't know. And neither does Alex. She's not privy to that. If there was an investigation post Tic Tac event, it was not done by a pilot. I can tell you that much. It was probably someone on the carriers or in a submarine of some sort. That's kind of what I'm envisioning. So yeah, I think it's a very viable question, but it's not one that Alex felt comfortable really discussing, because she said, I did my job. I got back on the ship and I moved on with my life. So yeah, but God, I feel like the answers to the Tic Tac lay in the water there somewhere. So I hope there was an investigation, and I hope someday we'll figure out what the hell that disturbance in the water was.
Dan, I'm sure if it was an EasyJet commercial pilot, you would have expected them to turn round, point the nose of the EasyJet liner at the water, and fly down to check out what it was.
Yeah, just go in, right? We have these multi-domain vehicles now. I assume EasyJet are employing them to transit passengers.
They would have charged it for the baggage, yeah.
Yeah, their baggage is so expensive. Come on.
Dan, I think we touched on it before, but again, quickly, the object under the water, is it something, is there there, or was it something less special, let's say?
It seems that there was a there. I really loved actually what Alex said in the interview, because ultimately we don't know. Like, what were people expecting? Like you just alluded to, Andy, did people expect her to just land her jet in the water and get out and investigate it? Like, what would you even do? Something underwater isn't going to show up on radars for the planes and things like that. It could have been a multitude of things. So whales, like you say, a sub that launched something that, was the technology of the Tic Tac. Could have been a nuclear-powered something that attracted the attention of UFOs that we know happens. But realistically, there are practicalities about this. So we kind of just have to throw our hands up and say, I don't know.
Nathan?
Yeah, I've always looked at that as really a, hey, look over here situation. Because if you think about the size of the Tic Tac, the altitude they were flying at, they were at the location where they were supposed to be, but it's the ocean. It's difficult to see things, make things out, particularly if they're not moving very much. And it's a strange object to begin with. So the fact the ocean is churning in that way, it's like, oh shit, like what, there's something happening right there. Oh, what is that also that's right there? So I looked at the whole thing from more of this is getting the attention of the pilots to look down. So that, I know, kind of opens up a lot of speculation, but that entire event, for me at least, lends to extraordinary speculation of the degree to which the object, the Tic Tac, anticipated and was connected to those pilots and the cap point. There are just many different oddities about it that indicate a kind of level of psychological connection. So could there be a technology related to it? I mean, certainly, but I looked at it as more of a X marks the spot, hey, look over here situation.
Awesome.
And that's something that I've heard before as well, just to kind of, back Nathan up there. There's a channel called Bashar, and I mean like channeling, not like a TV channel. And he was asked about the Tic Tac. Someone said, if you're a being from another place, tell us about the Tic Tac. What is it? Where did it come from? Why were they here? And he just smirked and he said, the only purpose of that encounter was for the Tic Tac to say, look at us, here we are.
And on that note, gents, just think that leaves something for people to think about, I think. I'm going to ask everyone just to kind of plug what you're working on at the moment. Let folks know. Dan, do you want to kick off?
Yeah, so I'm currently traveling. I'm kind of trying to put together a bunch of videos just based on sites that I've been seeing, some ancient Maya sites and things like that. And in about 4 weeks, I'll be headed to Colombia to carry on the investigation on the mountain there of the light phenomena. And we're geared up with like thermal cameras and stuff this time. So we stand to, if it appears on the mountain, we can certainly strike off whether it's prosaic or whether we found a genuine place with ball lightning or something a little more profound.
Awesome. And I think we'll have Ash on soon anyway, and you on, and Vinny again to chat about the season 2 before it comes up. Nathan, what about yourself?
Yeah, Calling All Beings, we're continuing to have interesting conversations, kind of make room for strange experiences. Really enjoying kind of the conversation we've had lately with folks in the Bigfoot area.
I have seen, I've seen some of those,
really, Yeah, very interesting in a lot of parallels too to the UFO experience. And then in Liminal Phrames with Exo Academia, and just continuing to kind of push this conversation forward and into some different territory, getting folks to think about the kind of broader implications of the phenomena, some of which I touched on the episode today. So yeah, that's the work, man. It's different than it was a year ago. I don't know how you would, you and Dan and Ryan, you would kind of reflect on that. It's different, but it's good.
Awesome. And Ryan, finally?
Yeah, man, I'm getting weird again. I'm so sick of balloons. I'm sick of all of it. I'm just being honest. So at Somewhere in the Skies, I'm going back to my roots. I'm talking to the experiencers. I'm talking about some of the more esoteric and sort of occult themed stuff with all of this. And next week I'm talking to Fred Anderson, a Swedish UFO investigator who looked into the Swedish Men in Black. So that's what you can sort of expect moving forward with Somewhere in the Skies. We're going back to the stories, the stuff that really matters, in my opinion. Be on the lookout for the new season of Ancient Aliens right now, doing some work on there, and coming out with a new book in just a few months now. Got the book cover design yesterday. Very stoked about that. So, be on the lookout for a new Somewhere in the Skies book in, I think, May, coming in May.
Awesome. I'll get you back on your own to talk about that one as well. And next up for me, I know what you mean, Ryan. I've got 3 members of the hobby group whose balloon was shot down over... no, I haven't. I'll be putting out a short preview just to let people know what's coming up. But Chris Bledsoe's on in March. Ross Coulter's coming on to answer some listener questions he never got to do last time. Graham Rendell's coming on. And I think that'll be it until April, to be honest, at this point. But other shows filling in between that as well. So listen, gents, thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it. Nathan, stay safe in the storm. That's not a analogy of the actual storm that you're going through at the moment. Dan is merging into, if you're watching this on YouTube, one of the Simpsons characters, given his intense background. Apologies if that's triggered anything for anyone watching, any strobe effects. And Ryan, all the best living up there in Scotland. I hope you're still enjoying it.
Absolutely. I'm loving it, man. Thanks for having me.
Anytime. Thank you, gents, and speak to you soon. That is all for this week's show. Thank you very much for listening. Please remember to leave the podcast a review on your chosen platform. You can like, retweet, and subscribe. That would all be very much appreciated. The shows are being uploaded onto YouTube as we speak more and more. You can sign up at patreon.com/That UFO Podcast to access the shows ad-free as well. Please get in touch on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, That UFO Podcast. Of course, on Twitter, it's at UFO UAPAM. And again, folks, as always, keep looking up. You never know what you might see.
It wasn't a Tic Tac and not quite a saucer, more like a hubcap designed by Chaucer, a little baroque and quite steampunk, like Alice was playing bass for the Parliament of Folk. The little fucker hovered right outside of my window, and when I shoved out the screen, he made it an issue. I don't think he expected me to see his ass, but I'd had some champagne and smoked a little grass. Meditative gamma state full on meta. Can't imagine how it could have been any better. I got to the top of the stairs and there he was. Like, you awake? I was about to abduct you, cuz. I jumped back and nearly kissed myself, and I climbed out the window after the elf, and I woke up in my bed and there was something on my head and everything was weird and everything was red. And I called out to my boys. They thought this was noise. They thought it was a dream. They thought it was my toys. They thought it was my problems, and they think I should seek therapy, and I don't know what to do because it doesn't really scare me. If you really want to know who I think may be, I think it's you and me and us and we and him and her and that and she and that thing over there and what's that, Jake? Consider your heart, consider time, consider your space, consider your lies, consider your life,